Hello everyone, welcome to another video. This is part 18 of my Gateway API for Kubernetes series. Originally I planned to end the series here, actually way before, but last time I said I will make one last video to have a conclusion and summary, but Microsoft just released the AKS add-on for the application gateway for containers, and I thought it's too great of a feature to not show you in this series. So the plan for today is, first, I'm going to give you a quick introduction what the application gateway for containers AKS Add-on is, and also what the requirements are to use it. And then, as always, I show you a demo how we can implement it. The reason why I want to show it to you is it makes setting up the application gateway for containers so much easier and faster, and it's a great way to get started. As always, if you're interested in the slides or all the demo code, you can scan the QR code, or you can also find the link to the GitHub repository in the description down below. So for the application gateway for containers AKS add-on, what's very important to remember is that it's a preview feature. So it might not work all the time, it might change over the future, so keep this in mind. And maybe we'll also see that it's not working, because I had my on and off problems, but overall it's working great so far. The reason why this add-on is great is it massively simplifies deployment of the application load balancer. So this is something Azure specific. And if you watch the second video of the series, I showed you how we can set it up ourselves. Back then we used the Helm chart, but you also had to create a matched identity. We had to give different permissions to match identity. So it was quite a lot of work, and the video was also quite long. But with this add-on, we can just install it. We install the add-on on AKS, and the add-on installs the application load balancer. So if you take a look here, it's a resource that's running inside the cluster, but we don't interact with it except that it creates the application gateway for containers for us, and therefore it also needs permissions on the network and the Azure Resource Manager. Again, since we're using the add-on, we don't have to configure anything. We just say install the add-on and that's it. What's also great about AKS add-ons is that we can install it on a new cluster or an existing AKS cluster. Today I'm going to show you how to install it on a new one, but it's basically the same step on an existing one. Before I can install the add-on, there are a couple of requirements we have to fulfill. So what's important is that our AKS cluster is running in a region that supports the application gateway for containers. If we try to deploy it in a region that doesn't support the application gateway, then we'll get an error. To check what region is supported, please take a look at the documentation, because this is always changing and it wouldn't make much sense to have it in the video, and in a month or a year it's totally different. Then also for the network, you have to use the Azure CNI or the Azure CNI overlay network. By default, if you create a new AKS cluster, it's using the Azure CNI already. But maybe if you have an older cluster that's still running, you might not use it. Then you have to have the workload identity enabled. This is a best practice for Kubernetes or AKS anyways, because it allows you to link managed identities to applications inside your Kubernetes cluster. And throughout the series, we have used this feature, for example, for the cert manager to be able to update our Azure DNS. Therefore, it should be enabled. And lastly, if you're using AKS Automatic, then you can't use the AKS add-on for now. AKS Automatic is a pre-configured AKS cluster with all the best practices from Microsoft. And I guess in the future it will work, but right now in the preview it's not working. So that's all you have to know. Now let's switch over to the terminal and let's create our AKS cluster and then deploy the add-on. Alright, here in the terminal, first we have to register a couple namespaces. You only have to do this once for a subscription, but just in case I'll show you how to do this. So it's AC provider register, and then you provide the namespace you want to register. In our case, that's 4 namespaces: the Microsoft Container Service, the Microsoft Network, the Microsoft Network Function, and the Microsoft Service Network. When you do this the first time, it usually takes a couple minutes, And you can also check the state by using the AC provider show command. Then you provide the name of the namespace. And then you can see here the state is registered and it's the registration state. So you can execute this for all 4 namespaces and all 4 should be registered. If one or multiple are still registering, then you have to wait a couple minutes and check again. So for now, I have all of that installed. Next up, we are going to add an extension to the Azure CLI. That's the ALB extension. And the second one is the AKS preview extension. Since I've already installed them, I'm not going to install them again, but I can do an update. So I can do an AC extension update and provide the name just to make sure I have the newest version. Here you can see the latest version is already installed. Then I do the same for the AKS preview extension. And here you can also see I have the newest version installed. After all of this, we have to register 2 more features. So that's AC feature register and then the namespace Microsoft Container Service. And then inside this namespace, we have the name Manage Gateway API Preview. And the second one is again in the Microsoft Container Service, but this time it's called Application Load Balancer Preview. And here you can also see the state is registered. This usually takes only a couple seconds, so you should see the registered state here. So that's everything we have to set up for our subscription. As I said, we only have to set it up once. So if you have multiple clusters, one time and you're good to go. Next, we're going to define a couple of variables. That's the information of our AKS cluster, so the name, location, and resource group. And then also some information about the application gateway. So the namespace of the infrastructure, this means where I'm going to deploy my gateway, the name of the application load balancer, the name of the gateway, and also the name of the gateway class. Here it's important that the name of the gateway class is set by Microsoft or by Azure, and it's always Azure ALB external. I just like to have it in a variable. Now we can create a new resource group with the name and the location we've just configured, and then we can deploy our AKS cluster. So I'm using the AC AKS create command. I provide the name and the resource group, and then the parameter down here are the important ones. So we have to enable the OIDC issuer and the workload identity. Both are needed for the workload identity. And then we enable the gateway API and the application load balancer. Both are needed for the AKS extension for the gateway API. This will now take a couple minutes, and then we should have our AKS cluster running with the application load balancer already installed. This means this extension creates the match identity, configures the permissions, and everything we need to create our application gateway. So this makes it a lot easier than the old way. If you have already an existing cluster and you want to update it, you can use basically the same command, but you just use AC AKS update. You again provide the name and the resource group, and then what parameter you want to update. For example, the last two, if you already have workload identity enabled and only want to enable the gateway API extension. I said before, all the code of the demo will be down in the description, so you can just copy paste it from GitHub and you don't have to type anything. But for now, I'm going to stop the video, and once the cluster is created, we will continue setting up our application gateway. Our AKS cluster has been created. Now I can just download the credentials, and then we can take a look at what has been deployed and set up the gateway. So first, let's take a look at all our pods in the kube system namespace. If you scroll up a little bit, we can see here the first two are the ALB controller. This means the application load balancer. This is the resource that will create the application gateway for us. If we now take a look at the gateway class, then we can see we also have the gateway class already deployed, even though we didn't have to do anything. That's also done by the application load balancer. And we can see here, it's the same name I have written in the variable. And lastly, the extension also created a service account with the name ALB controller service account. And this service account is linked to a managed identity, and the managed identity has a couple permissions. In the first video, where I set up the application gateway by hand, it took a long time to set all of this up, but everything is done by the extension. Now let's switch over to the Azure portal and let's see what has been created there. Here in the Azure portal, we can see the resource group we have created and where we have deployed our AKS cluster, and then the secondary resource group that's automatically created with all the resources inside. And here are also all the resources the application load balancer created. So if you open this, we can see we have here the default AKS features or components like the virtual machine scale set, the network. But we can also see we have here, not this one, we have here a managed identity, and it's called Application Load Balancer App Gateway Container AKS. And this has been created by the extension. So if you open this one and check the role assignments, then we can see we have here 3 role assignments. So that's the network contributor, the application gateway for containers configuration manager, and the reader. In my first video, where we set up everything by hand, we also had to set up this. Additionally, if we click here under federated credentials, we can see we have here one federated credential. If you open this, we can see here the configuration. This means we have here the namespace and the service account I showed you before. And this is the link from the application load balancer over the service account to the managed identity. And the managed identity has all the permissions we need. What's also important or good to know is if you take a look at the VNet and then at the subnets, we can see there's one additional subnet here, and it's called AKS App Gateway. Back when we created everything by hand, we also had to create a new subnet and then give permissions to the managed identity, and we also had to delegate the subnet. So if you take a look all the way on the bottom, we can see here it's delegated to a service, and the service is Microsoft Service Networking Traffic Controllers. So all of this was set up for us. So now we can create our application gateway for containers. Or to be more precise, tell the application load balancer to create it. To do this, we need the subnet ID. So we can either copy this one here, or if you switch back to the terminal, I can show you how you can do it in code, and then you can just follow along by pasting the code. Now we've already seen everything the AKS extension does for us. So we didn't have to deploy the application load balancer controller. We didn't have to create the managed identity, enable or configure enter a workload identity, or create the subnet in the VNet. All the steps from now on are just following what we did before, meaning in my first video where we set up everything manually. This means now we're going to create our application load balancer. This load balancer creates the application gateway for containers, and then we are going to deploy our gateway. This gateway will have a listener and will also be the entry point to our cluster. This means we get a CNAME, and then we can point our DNS entries to the CNAME. If you followed the first video, there's nothing new here, but if you're interested how it works, let's get started creating our application load balancer. Let's get the ID of the subnet using the Azure CLI. Unfortunately, it's not totally straightforward, but with a little bit of a workaround, we can find it. So first, we have to figure out what is the resource group name of the components of AKS, the usually MC underscore resource group. We can do this by querying the node resource group of our AKS cluster. If we take a look now at this variable, we can see here it's the MC underscore, the resource group we have just seen before. Next up, we have to get the ID of the network of our AKS cluster. So we list all the networks, And since we just created the AKS cluster, we know that there's only one network inside this resource group. Therefore, we can get the right ID. So if you take a look at this one, we can see here the ID. And now we can be a little bit cheeky because the subnet is just an extension or addition to the ID of the VNet. The way it looks is we have our VNet, and then the subnet ID is just /subnets and then / the name of the subnet. And this works because the name of the subnet is always AKS App Gateway. So as I said, it's a little bit of a workaround, but for the demo, I want to keep it as simple as possible and as easy as possible for you to follow along. And I think that's good enough for now. So now we can create our application gateway for containers. So even though it's part 18 of the series, I still have trouble pronouncing it. Anyways, now let's create a new namespace. So that's the infrastructure namespace where I want to have everything for my gateway located. Then we are going to create the application load balancer inside this namespace. So we provide the name for the load balancer, the name of the namespace, and what's important here, this association. And this links the application gateway for containers to our AKS cluster via this subnet. Therefore, we needed the subnet ID. And once we have this, we can apply it. And now it's going to take around 5 to 6 minutes, and then we should be able to see our application gateway for containers. So in the meantime, we can do a kubectl get application load balancer, and I add the watch parameter so I can see whenever something is updating. So right now we can see it was first accepted, the status was true, so that's a good starting point. Then it switched to in progress, and the status is still true, so that's still very good. Now let's wait 5 minutes, and then we should see it being finished and accepted. When I was preparing for this video, I tried this step around 5 times, and I think 3 out of these 5 times I got an error message, and only 1 or 2 times it actually worked. And luckily I already peaked a bit and we again got an error message, but I'll show to you that this is not a problem. And this also shows that it's still a preview feature. But for now, let's just scroll down and see what the output is. So here we have some information about our application load balancer. It looks quite complicated, but if we scroll further down, then we can see here the reason accepted and the status is true. So this is what we want to see. That's amazing. And now everything should work. But if we scroll further down, we have again here an in progress. So that's a bit confusing. Then we scroll further and further. Then we have here again accepted and true. That's again good. But if you scroll all the way down, then we can see here we have a reason ready and the status is false. And here it says timed out waiting for overlay extension config to be ready. So I have to admit, I don't know what this means. In my experience, when I tested it, even though I get this error message, everything worked for me. And also sometimes if you wait a bit longer, then it will also just work. So if you scroll down, let's see. Here we have again an accepted equals true. And that's the last update. So I think if the overlay times out, then you just have to wait a couple minutes longer and then it should figure it out itself. I got one error message that was a bit odd. It says status code HTTP 200 okay, but the application gateway for containers couldn't be configured. And if I opened it in the Azure portal, I also got an error message saying that the last configuration was not good. In this case, I just deleted my entire cluster, redeployed it, and everything worked. So for now, everything should be working. If something doesn't work, you can always take a look at the logs of the ALB controller pods. If you install the application load balancer by hand, then they are in the same namespace as the application load balancer we just deployed, the infrastructure namespace. But if you use the AKS extension, then they're in the kube system namespace. So remember, in the beginning, I showed you the kubectl get pods in the kube system. And all the way up here, we have the ALB controller. And here you can do kubectl logs of the ALB controller, and then we'll see what is going on. But for now, everything seems great. Now let's switch over to the Azure portal and let's check again what has been created. Here in the Azure portal, we are in our MC resource group. If I refresh this, now I can see we have here our application gateway for a container. This has been created by the application load balancer, and we didn't have to do anything except give it the ID of the AKS subnet. If you open this, now I can see also under the front ends that we don't have anything there yet. That's because we haven't deployed a gateway. That's what we're going to do in the next step. And here under association, we can see here the link to our AKS subnet, the one that has been also automatically created. Now let's switch back to our terminal and let's create our gateway. And this will be the last step before we can use the application gateway for containers. Back in the terminal, let me paste our gateway configuration. So here we have some very basic information. For example, the name of the gateway and in what namespace we want to deploy it. That's again the infrastructure namespace. Then the namespace where we have deployed our application load balancer. That's the same namespace. The name of application load balancer and also the gateway class name. Lastly, I have also one HTTP listener that's listening on port 80, and it allows routes from all namespaces. This means all my applications inside my cluster can access or can create routes on port 80. As you can see, it's a very basic configuration. We don't have any host names. We don't have HTTPS, but for the sake of the demo, let's keep it as simple as possible. Then we're going to apply this. Now it's going to take a couple minutes while this is being applied. And if you're interested in more additional features like HTTPS, routing and so on, take a look at the playlist. You will find in the description down below where I have by now 18 videos where I show you step by step how to use all the features. So now, hopefully everything has been created. So now let's do a kubectl get gateway for the gateway we have just deployed. It's a bit hard to see, but what we can see here, the programmed state is set to true. And we also got a CNAME record an address, which we can use as the CNAME. Then we can also query this one. Again, using kubectl get gateway. And here we have our DNS record. This means from now on, we can point all our URLs via CNAME to this domain. Therefore, we will be able to access our cluster through the application gateway for containers. As I said, I have a whole bunch of other videos where I show you how to set up the routing, first how to deploy a demo application, how to configure HTTPS with the cert manager, how we can integrate the Azure web application firewall, and many more videos. All right, this is everything I want to show you today. So we've seen how we can use the application gateway for containers AKS extension to very easily create and deploy our application gateway for containers. So the extension created the ALB controllers. This means we had the pods already running in our Kubernetes cluster, and it also created the managed identity, the link between the ALB controller and the managed identity. Then it configured all the permissions needed, and it also created a new subnet, which we then used for the setup. But we have also seen that it's still a preview features. We had some slight hiccups that solved or resolved by itself. but sometimes it just doesn't work and you have to recreate the deployment. So always keep this in mind when using preview features. But for the future, I think this will be a great addition to the application gateway for containers because it's so easy and so fast to set it up, and I'm curious to see what the future brings. If you like this kind of videos, please like it and share it. If you have any questions or problems, leave a comment down below, and I hope to see you next week with another video.